Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining us this evening as we spend this next hour together. As always, I do hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family. My opening observation tonight: since the beginning of 2020, we've been dazed, bewildered, and shocked by the events that have forever changed our lives. COVID-19 has caused the entire world, it seems, to make drastic changes in how we communicate with each other socially, how we conduct business, travel, and respond to a deadly killer that seems to keep mutating. Also, in the aftermath of George Floyd's horrible and shocking death that was viewed around the world, we find ourselves dealing with the issues of racism, bigotry, and prejudice. So we protest for justice and peace in the streets and in the boardrooms of corporate America and in Congress, and yes, even in the White House. We have to do the same thing in our own house. We, the people, must continue to have dialogue about how we ourselves transform our hearts and our minds and our respect of each other. And then we must find common ground to clear a path to our common good. Therefore, we must continue a relentless pursuit for unity. And one thing I'd like to add to that is never be afraid to show compassion to people in need. Never be afraid to raise your voice for justice and peace. In fact, the only time we should be looking down on people is when we're literally reaching down to help them up. And that way we follow the credo of loving our neighbors as we should love ourselves. So when you look in the mirror, I hope you love the person that you see so that you can love the neighbor that is yet to be. Our world can be made greater by doing good for each other. And those are my opening observations. Welcome back to the program. So as you know, the number of COVID cases continues to rise, causing a lot of municipalities, cities, and state governments a great deal of concern, especially when there is still mixed messaging coming out of the White House. Joining me now is Dr. Cheryl Davis. She is the Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Relations Commission. And she joins us now to talk about what's happening in San Francisco. And Dr. Davis, it's good for you to join us today. And we want to know what's happening on the West Coast because I've talked to people in Los Angeles who are in leadership there, and they've discussed how problematic this coronavirus has become. How difficult is it for people living in San Francisco?
First off, thank you so much for having me and having an opportunity to share. You know, it has had its challenges, the same that we're seeing across the nation, right? That it's low income communities of color that are being hardest hit because those are the folks who are having the hardest time to really stay at home and shelter in place and still be able to meet their needs. We're trying to do some very intentional outreach and engagement in our communities of color, specifically African American and our Latinx population, which has been hard hit here in the city and county of San Francisco. So the challenges are there, but we have really got to look at this as an opportunity to develop and build up our systems to be able to support those most vulnerable in crises and times not of crises as well.
You know, you talk about setting up your systems. Now, your systems are near and dear to everyone in San Francisco, but to your point about the Black and brown communities, the disparities that already exist there because of healthcare disparities and then economic inequities, how do you put a system in place to shore up the healthcare of the citizens who are often marginalized in those underserved communities?
Well, it's an ongoing process, I will say. You know, coupled with this conversation around COVID-19 is also what we've seen, the aftermath of the George Floyd and how we have those conversations. So here in San Francisco, Supervisor Shaman Walton and Mayor London Breed have led the effort to reallocate some of police dollars to go to the African American community. So that's one way. We've been having a series, we've had over 11 community meetings where we have engaged over 600 community members to have a conversation around what are the resources, what are the things that we need to do as a city to improve outcomes for the Black population. We've supported an initiative called the Latino Task Force that has been based in the Mission District of San Francisco, that is being led by our Latinx population, to really drill down on getting food to people, to really challenge the city and what our communications efforts look like, what our outreach efforts look like, what our dispatching of resources to address the pandemic look like in that community. And most recently, we've launched a similar effort with an initiative called Mega Black, which is focused on the Black community. So, and now we're leading a cross-cultural justice program with our API, Asian Pacific Islander community, to again, be really intentional and understand each neighborhood, each community isn't the same, but what we do needs to be informed by the realities and the experiences in those communities.
Wow, that is, like you said, it's very heartwarming. I'd like you to stay with me, Dr. Davis, because on the other side of the break, I'd like to talk to you more about your campaign there in San Francisco to circle those dollars throughout the community, circulate those dollars throughout the community that you've taken or will be taking away from the police in order to reform the community as a whole and bring that divide closer together. I'm talking to Dr. Cheryl Davis. She is the Director of Human Relations Commission there in San Francisco. We'll be back with much more after the break. Welcome back to the program. So during the break, I was commending Dr. Cheryl Davis, who is the Director of the Human Relations Commission there in San Francisco. And certainly San Francisco is a major city in this country. And like any other city in the wake of George Floyd, they are having to look at their police departments to figure out how they can cross the divide and repair the breach between the police and the Black community, as well as other communities of color. And Dr. Davis, what specifically have you been able to do? And are you getting support not only from the community, but the police department as well?
You know, I have had some conversations with the chief of police, and he, you know, of course, no one wants to lose money from their budget, but he is not opposed to supporting the Black community, and also has said, you know, like, if this is the direction from the mayor, then this is the direction that he has to take. So we've been able to have some conversations and not feel like we're being pitted against each other in that regard. We have had a series of community meetings, like we've done some surveys. I did a survey just with young people, and I will tell you, high school and college age young people, and in a matter of like 3 days, 200 young people had filled out that survey, of which about 70% are Black, and sharing their ideas and thoughts on what we can do to support the Black community. We have another survey that we did with folks living in public housing, did a convening a meeting with them to hear their feedback. And you hear these ideas and suggestions, and it's like, it's so simple and so easy, and it can be so transformative. And so that part that we're now kind of just going back through, we've got over 400 recommendations from these 11 meetings that we had. We're kind of trying to categorize them, compile them, connect them with data and research, but then also connect them with the outcomes that we'd like to see happen. And so we have everything from, you know, an accountability task force so that the city is doing a better job of understanding where they've allocated money and if it's having the intended impacts, to, you know, let's start a first responders pipeline program where we're getting high school students in this pipeline to become firefighters and police officers, and to respond in a way that is community centered to some of the challenges that we see folks having. So it is and education is another one that's a huge ask in there. So we're putting all that together. We'll share that initial report and continue probably over the next year to think about what does it look like to amplify community voice, but also to allocate resources to places where we can actually see less need for more kind of aggressive criminal engagement, right? Like we're seeing less criminal activity and not needing as much resources to go there.
You know, I'm excited to hear that. I serve on the board of the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. And one of the things that they've discussed on that board is how do we engage in actively caring for people. And they speak a lot to police chiefs throughout the country. And they've been pushing this plan of actively caring for people policing. So if you have police being able to show that they actively care about not only their blue line, but also Black lives, brown lives, yellow lives, red lives, all lives, and bringing that community together, there's a trust that can be built up. And certainly since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, there is a need to do that. So again, I have to find that I commend you on the dialogue that you've opened up between the police department and the mayor's office and the community itself. And the fact that you're talking about 200 young people and among them something like 70 or more Black youth stepping up saying, this is what we need. And the fact that they're actually getting engaged and becoming firefighters and police officers, that speaks well, I think, for the future of San Francisco with regard to bridging this divide.
No, I appreciate that. I will say, you know, one of the first meetings we did was to try and convene and focus on the Black African-American population. And we had over 150 people in that conversation. And contrary to public belief, right? Like the focus was really on, to your point, accountability, partnership, and how do we get people to care about each other, right? Not about who's going to get money and what we're going to cut and all of that, but like, how do we really be accountable to each other? How do we not just talk about the police or the city systems, but how we as a community, right? Like people always say it takes a village, but how do we hold the village accountable as well? And so those conversations were just inspirational and kind of digging down deep in accountability is not just for the police department, it's not just for the mayor, it's not just for the supervisor, but we all have a role to play in improving our communities and our neighborhoods. And we cannot also allow or provide space for nonprofit organizations or teachers or schools or anybody else to just not do their part and just blame one entity over another.
Fantastic. I'm going to take another break. When we come back, I'd like to talk to you about education. I'd like to talk to you about schools and the dilemma as to reopening. Do you reopen in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic? And if so, what kind of problem does that present in making sure that the children, the teachers, and the staff are taken care of? Back with more after the break. Welcome back to the program. So I'm having the good pleasure of talking to Dr. Cheryl Davis. She is the Executive Director of the Human Relations Commission there in San Francisco. And it's such an important commission to have because your city is very diverse. You have a lot of ethnic groups from all over. You have immigrants, you have everybody in San Francisco, and why not? Because it's a great city to live and love. With so many things that you have going for you. But one of the key things you've talked about in this dialogue that you and I are having is police reform, addressing COVID-19, and one of the factors is, what do you do with the school system? How do you get the kids back to school? What's the plan out there in terms of reopening schools? Are you doing that, or do you have to go to a distance learning because of the safety concerns surrounding coronavirus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, again, one of those challenges we talked about in the beginning in terms of the alignment of who's impacted by COVID-19 and some of the disparities we were already seeing in education and poverty and all of those pieces. Currently, the San Francisco Unified School District is anticipating going back to school, doing distance learning the first few weeks of that. And the challenges with that are, I experience it myself. Certain neighborhoods have greater, their Wi-Fi capability is better and greater. And then when you start to have multiple people in the home, whether somebody's working from home and then you've got two young people from home and everybody's on the internet at the same time and they're getting kicked off and Wi-Fi service is spotty. And then there's a piece of this that is about what's the hands-on learning, even in the distance learning, right? Like we don't necessarily want young people to spend all their time online, right? So what are the packets? What's that look like? And we've been, again, very fortunate with our work at the Human Rights Commission to say, we're gonna support that. We have worked with the public library. We've worked with community partners. We've bought thousands of books. We've been working with schools as well as the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA and local community centers to put together what we're calling activity packets. So we have, I've created a curriculum that goes with each of the books. We've got books that are, the traditional Dr. Seuss, but we also have books that are about Fannie Lou Hamer and about Let the Children March, so about the Children's March. And so we've got another book that looks at heart and feeling. We've got a book that's focused on Cesar Chavez and another one on the janitor strike. And we've got this curriculum that looks at even our local change makers. And we're working on what does a virtual tour look like of a museum and being able to do that kind of now go out in your community and go out and see who are the local heroes, the folks that are picking up the garbage or the folks that are keeping our streets clean or the police officer or the fire department, and talk about what change you're going to bring. So we're really trying to think about how we as a community integrate and support the online, the distance learning with some pieces of, here's an activity book, here's some markers, here's a collage sheet, and then on top of it, get outside, put your mask on, walk around the block and see what you see, and then come back and think about how you're going to contribute to change in your community. And even if that's just you're going to go online as a high schooler and say, don't forget to put on your face covering when you go outside, right? Being very intentional about how we think about it.
We'll be right back with more of the show after this. Before I let you go, the elephant in the room throughout this coronavirus pandemic has been the epidemic of violence, but it's also been the rising up of the virus of racism. San Francisco, as I've stated, is a multi-ethnic city. It represents many nations around the world. You've got a strong faith-based community out there. How do you bring people together to have a conversation about race so that we can truly embody the true meaning of United We Stand?
I tell people all the time, it's interesting. Like, I was born in the South, but I was born in Texas, but I grew up in the Bay Area here. And the one thing I always really hold true to is, regardless to where folks are in their religiosity or their faith, I know for me that is so much more than religion. There's a spirituality that is connected to that in so many ways created and developed who I am, right? I know for a fact I learned how to read and read better from Bible studies and Sunday school and like having to be put on the spot to have to do something in church. And there is something to be said about the connection between faith-based efforts and our success as community, regardless to what folks think, right? This idea, I was telling a group last week, faith-based, that, when I think about how I learned to move through life watching my grandmother in those moments of where science would say you need to be quiet and meditate and take a moment, and my grandmother coming in from a hard day's work with, when she worked at the cotton mill with cotton in her hair, when she worked at Texas Instruments with like little pieces of metal in her hair, but that she would come in, she didn't need a doctor, she didn't need a scientist, she would come in and sit down and whether she called it prayer or meditation or taking a moment, she knew she needed to like heal herself, right? In those moments of frustration, I can hear her in the kitchen when she'd had a really bad moment or whatever, doing something like, have you any rivers that seem, like she took that moment of song really to calm herself. And there's so much that we can learn from this, from our culture, from our faith base. You know, I always go back to Maya Angelou's, you know, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. There is something that we have to acknowledge about faith offering us hope, faith offering us guidance, faith giving us the tools, and that if we do not partner in some way, right, with that peace that helps to really ground us in the chaos and the insanity of what is something that we can't understand, then we will not be able to heal. And so I'm just grateful for the Interfaith Council and the brotherhood of believers, even if their beliefs are a little bit different, to come together and help us in this healing process, because we can't do it alone and we can't do it without hope. And faith offers us that hope that no matter what's going on here right now today, things can be better.
That's powerful and very truthful. And I thank you so much, Doc, for sharing that with us. Dr. Cheryl Davis, who is the Executive Director of the Human Rights Commission there in San Francisco. I know I deviated a little bit of calling it the Human Relations Commission, but it's the Human Rights Commission. And certainly what we're talking about with this COVID-19 pandemic, it really does come down to human rights and lifting people up with the burden that they have, still finding ways as a city and as a government to really break through those things that have caused so much hurt. And this is a virus that we have to contend with on every level. So I thank you, as well as Mayor Breed, for what you're doing in San Francisco. Anytime you need to bring us an update, don't hesitate. Let the mayor know the invitation remains open to her as well to come on this show and talk about how she and you and so many others there in San Francisco in government and in civic communities and faith communities are working together to help heal San Francisco in the midst of this coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. Time now for strengthening the family. And one of the things that our families are going through, and we've talked about it a lot with George and Tondra Gregory, they're here with me now, founders of Journey for Life, also NFL chaplains for the Los Angeles Chargers. And so we talked about a myriad of issues that face our families in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, and also the stresses from the disruption in our economy, as well as racism, a la in the wake of George Floyd. We got a lot on our plate, and how do we talk to our children about it in order to help our children reach out and touch the lives of others and not be hurt by any racial overtones that may be seen on television? How do we deal with our children from the cradle to teenage to young adults?
Yeah, well, what we know, Kelly, is that the kids have the most at stake. The reason why is they have to live in a world that's moving forward. It's not going to go back to the past, meaning that they've got to live in the future. And so what we try to teach parents all across the country is number one, is you've got to model inclusivity, right? You've got to model that. Kids don't do what you say, they do what you do. And so it starts in the home. And we've learned that when we moved to New York City. Our kids thought that they were going to be excluded. They thought that they were going to be picked on, but the kids in New York City surprised us.
Yeah, they were very inclusive because New York City is made up of everyone's from somewhere else. Everyone is different from them. So they just have this openness to accepting outsiders. And my son at the time would have been in 6th grade. And he was like, wow, Mom. They were just like, hey, I haven't seen you here before. Do you want to sit with us? And they just welcomed him right in. And so it starts with us modeling, teaching our kids that it's okay to be different. Everyone's different, but just be open to accepting others. And I feel like a big part of teaching and modeling that for our kids is also teaching them to accept themselves, because a part of accepting others and loving others is having a love and acceptance of yourself. Like in Mark, in the Bible, it just talks about love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not loving and accepting of yourself, you may feel threatened by others who are different than you. So it really starts with a lot of modeling and a lot of teaching in the home.
Yeah, yeah. We also teach that we have to expose our kids, right?
Mhm.
Meaning that our world is so small. Meaning, we're from the South. We and very small towns in the South will. If we never went to New York City, we wouldn't have realized how small our world was. And because I've traveled internationally, I realized that our American bubble is so small. There are many cultures. There's many things that I was exposed to once I got out of my bubble. So we have to teach our kids that we have to be intentional and give them a lens that's much broader than what we've experienced. And that's going to cost us, right? Sometimes it's going to cost us money. Sometimes it's going to cost us to say, wow, I've got to be exposed to newer foods, newer cultures, newer ethnicities. And that's all about embracing change.
Yeah, and I like that. And like God intentionally made us different. Our creator, our God values uniquenesses and differences, right? So I remember growing up with a song called Jesus Loves the Little Children, all the children of the world, red, yellow, black, and white. They are precious in his sight. So God did not make a mistake with making us very unique and very diverse. And so we just have to teach our kids that this is intentional. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be unique, and we're supposed to love and value that. One of the other things that I feel like that can help us be open to teaching our kids differences, even just us having friends, in our home that are different than us intentionally getting our kids with friends that are different than us can also, like George was saying, broaden their perspective and expose them to different cultures. I can't tell you how much our kids learned from visiting their friends who were from a different culture or a different upbringing than them. When we moved to New York City, it was easy for them to get exposed to different cultures. They played together and they enlightened each other.
George and Tandra, thank you. And to your point, we all need to be connected, because at the end of the day, we are interconnected and interrelated. I appreciate you both so much, George and Tandra Gregory, joining me tonight. Strengthening the family, certainly your advice is very important and very appropriate for a time such as this. Thank you both. Welcome back to the program. So I'm joined now by David Lynn, and he's got a great project that's out, and he's going to talk to us about it. It's really a statement, if you will, about what's happened to us as a nation in the wake of George Floyd. But David, you're coming to me from Miami, and I got to talk about what's happening right there, right now, and that's the spike in coronavirus cases. How are you doing, and how are you taking care of yourself to make sure you're safe and well?
Doing my best to stay inside. Only leaving, maybe for groceries or things like that. But man, I think with Florida, the real problem has been just people acting like everything is normal when it's not. Everybody, the beach was full. When you go out in the streets, even when I do have to go grocery shopping, it's still full. So the best thing I can do is just stay inside. If we are out, I wear my mask. But I just suggest for everybody to stay inside, man. That's what I try to do, because there's really no other way to avoid constant contact with other people. Like, we all just have to tough it out for a little bit, stay inside, and let this thing, go away.
That's great advice. Hopefully the government leaders there will follow your example. and not politicize. Uh,
Trust me, you and me both are hoping for that.
Let me ask you about your new song and and what you're stating in your song. Tell me about it and how or what motivated you to bring this work to all of us to understand what happened in the George Floyd case and why we should never repeat that again.
Right. Well, my reasoning for making the song, the inspiration came from the George Floyd, but it was talking about my personal experience with police. And when I saw the George Floyd, the reason it made me so upset was because I knew that that could be me. And I knew that that could be literally any of us. And you don't have to be guilty. You don't have to even do anything wrong. And in my situation, you know, when I dealt with the police and, you know, it was unfair treatment, I really didn't do anything. I was literally, this is just one incident, you know, last year sitting in a parking lot. And my brother Izzy Beats, he's a producer. He has a lot of hit songs and stuff. And we just left the studio. We wanted to go and buy some equipment, just a guitar, something for the guitar. And my brother went inside. I decided to stay in the car. And this officer pulls up to the car. I didn't have anything. And he just said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm waiting for my brother. I'm in the car where, you know, like," and he said, "Well, I need you to step out. I need to look through your book bag." Immediately, you know, in that moment, I knew he was wrong. I knew you know, lawfully, I didn't have to. But I also knew if I resist, if I throw up an attitude towards you right now, things can really go the wrong way for me. Yeah. And even if you explain yourself after for me, that would be my last moment. You know, I won't be able to explain like George Floyd. He can't tell his side. So he took my book bag, he opened the zipper, emptied it. He just put it upside down and just emptied all my stuff in the street.
Wow.
And he said, "You're being detained." Didn't find anything in my book bag. So he said, "You're being detained." And, you know, he put me in the back of his car, everything. Took me out of the car, put me in the back of his car, still with no reasoning. And then afterwards he said, "You're suspected of murder." And I said, "How? I just came into town yesterday and we do music, you know?" And when I told him I do music, he kind of laughed at me like, "Yeah, right." You know, and like, you know, I hear guys say that all the time, but I was like, no, this is really my profession. This is how I make a living. And I travel in town to do it. And, you know, when he looked at me, someone walked out, a part of my management, Drea. She saw me in the back of the car and she began to state all the reasons, you know, as to why I shouldn't be in the back of the car and how he was violating my rights. And then he said, "Oh, he fits a description of somebody who committed a murder." So when they came, people from the store came and said, "Yes, there was a murder yesterday, last night." But they said there's been no description. Nobody has a description of anything. So we don't know who it was. We're trying to find that out. So then after that happened, now the cop let me out the back of the car. He was quick to, you know, let me go because the crowd. And I was just like, man, you know, had there been no one in that moment to step up and say something, things could have really went left for me. You weren't accusing me of something small. This was a really big accusation. And I just thought about, when I saw the George Floyd, I thought about how many stories we didn't hear about. You know, how many things didn't make it to the camera of Black men and women who have suffered at it. How many people are in prison right now for something they may not have done, serving years, you know? And I just saw in that moment, he could have, if it didn't happen where somebody stepped in, he could have really set things a whole nother direction for my life, you know? And that's what inspired the song, the anger of feeling like you have so little control and someone feeling like they can literally just play with your life. They can literally say whatever they want, accuse you of whatever they want, no proof, and get away with it, you know? And when I saw the George Floyd, regardless of what they said, there's no reason for that man should have died that day. No reason, you know?
We're coming back with more of my interview after this. As we talk about police reform, I got to ask you, do you see a way that we can have reform so that the good cops intervene on what's happened and we turn this around so that there's a respect there that has been so hard to maintain and to develop?
I would love if more police stepped up and spoke up. I've seen police speak up, but a lot of these police, their main focus is defending the police. And I get it. All of you are not bad cops, but don't ignore what's happening with the bad cops. We need somebody on your side to speak out against it as well. We need somebody in the blue that's saying, or not just somebody, but more people saying this is wrong. We are a part of this system and we're trying to improve it. But every time I hear from a police officer, I have seen some videos though where some police officers have stepped up. But one of the big problems is that when there's one cop doing something wrong and none of the others step up and say anything, that's how George Floyd ended up there. And if one person just said, hey, ease up, hey, come off, you know what I'm saying? And nobody did. So I think with everybody's playing their part right now, as far as a protester, as far as business owner, everybody's doing something, but I feel like there's not enough police officers in the conversation and addressing police brutality, not just defending the police department, but addressing it. And we having those good cops, if we do have good cops, which we do, we need those good cops to speak up and be a part of this conversation a little bit more.
Well, let me ask you, you talked about the people who are out there on the front lines protesting, and then there are people behind the lines protesting in their own way as well. And then there are activists like yourself. I would say that your song is one of activism, to say to the world, let's wake up, let's stop this madness. The big elephant in the room, though, is racism. So what do you say about the fact that there are now whites and blacks, browns and yellows and reds, all God's children stepping up to protest this and call for racial justice and racial reconciliation? What part can you play? What part can I play? What part can everybody play to have that conversation and to come to that table of brotherhood where we get beyond the conversation and really do something that will change and transform the way we treat each other based on skin tone?
I feel like it's more so about connecting, you know, because the protest, everything, it's all through people just connecting with each other and relating at the end of the day. And I feel like there are ways we can be more effective, but like you said, it's a matter of getting everybody on the same page, I think, you know, creating or some type of platform where we can all, I would say, be in touch with what's going on. And I know we have Instagram, I know we have social media, period, but I feel like there could be a platform specifically for this where it's similar to an Instagram, to a, you know what I'm saying? And I know they have these things, but they're not as popular as they should be. But I feel like somebody could create a platform where people could connect much faster.
Yeah.
Meaning, when it comes to a Breonna Taylor situation, one of these situations, people can connect way faster rather than waiting for it to pop up in the news or waiting for it. Have some platform where all these protesters that are out there, to the guy like me who's making the song, to you who's constantly, you know, speaking on these issues, have somewhere where we can specifically connect on these issues. Not just because if I go on Instagram, there'll be some people talking about, if I go on Facebook, there'll be some people talking about it. But then as I scroll down, there's going to be something that's going to take my mind off of it. And then I might pass something else that's on there. Then I'll scroll down and see something else. So what I think is that there needs to be a platform where people specifically talk about these racial injustices, and it will make it easier and faster for us to all connect on these things, whether it's somebody might say, hey, we need to vote out this, call this number. We could do it on social media, but if there's somewhere where we know, just like how everybody's checking Instagram every day, they get on their phone. That's the first thing people do in there, if they have that, an app or some type of platform that they go to specifically on that, no distractions, and people putting ways that we can make a difference constantly.
David, what's your hope for America?
In this year, 2020, there's been a lot of people are starting to wake up, and I feel like this generation has learned from generations before, and it's just where we're just getting better. But I just want America to actually become great. I don't want that to get mixed up with what Donald Trump says. I want America to actually become great, where we don't see classism and we don't see racism, and sometimes when I think about racism, it's so stupid. Like when you really just think about it, like grown men and women arguing because their skin tone is a different color from each other, and it's crazy. It almost sounds like two children arguing about the color of their toy. It's so foolish. So,
well, my brother, got mad love and respect for you. Keep doing what you do.
All right.
Peace out.
Thank you so
Coming
much.
back for more after this. Welcome back, and now for my final word. David Lynn talks about the song I Can't Breathe. It's raw, it's real, and it reminds us of what happened to George Floyd, but what could happen to any one of us of the color black and brown. To sum it all up in this final word, my skin should not be viewed as a weapon. Hopefully, we've been ignited, and united to keep spreading not racism, not fear, but love, freedom, and peace. Here now is the song I Can't Breathe as we leave you tonight. Good night. Have a great weekend.
I see that you just don't get it. I see that you just don't listen. I'm out here minding my business. You say I fit the description. Say you supposed to keep the peace, supposed to be defending me. Treat me like an enemy. Now you here arresting me. Just another black with a felony. Use the law to make us slaves, that's the recipe. Matter of fact, them laws were made in days, it was slavery. Constitution tried to say I'm 3/5 of a man, and I'm supposed to trust in the system, still knowing they plan. That's why I always move with a gun in my hand. If I don't protect myself, I know I don't stand a chance. And if I die today, I pray that God make a way. I need to know my daughter and her mama okay. It's looking crazy, how I getting killed by the ones that I thought would save me. Knew it was a trick from the get-go, these played me. I hope somebody record it so it could drown out every lie that they gon' put in their story. Say I resisted arrest, but the truth is it was pain. You had your knee in my chest. You ain't without that gun badge and bulletproof vest. Probably my last words before I lose my breath. Can't breathe, no. Can't breathe.